Beyond the Game. Brought to you by Turkish Airlines.
It's a landmark decision that could have ramifications across the world. Caster Semenya has lost her appeal at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. It means that she'll effectively have to dope to lower her testosterone levels to create a level playing field for other athletes. It opens a debate about gender politics, human rights, and what right an athletics association has to control a woman's body. I'm Samantha Johnson, and welcome to this special edition of Beyond the Game. Caster Semenya's career is up in the air. The South African has dominated middle distance running since she burst onto the scene in 2009. But this decision, made at sport's highest court, could spell the end of her reign. Lance Santos has more.
In her own words, Caster Semenya wants the Court of Arbitration for Sport to allow her to run naturally, the way she was born. That won't happen. South Africa's golden girl has what the IAAF describe as an unfair advantage because of her high testosterone levels. The court has ruled in favour of world athletics and will allow the IAAF to regulate testosterone levels in female athletes with differences of sexual development.
Caster Semenya and ASA requested that the DSD regulations be declared null and void. By majority, the CAS panel has dismissed the request for arbitration, considering that Caster Semenya and ASA were unable to establish that the DSD regulations were invalid.
After the ruling, Semenya tweeted this: "Sometimes it's better to react with no reaction." South Africa's Sports Minister Thokozile Xasa says the government will study the judgment and determine a way forward. She also thanked Semenya in a statement, calling her by her first name. "You remain our golden girl. What you have done for our people and girls is enormous. You have flown our flag high. You have united a nation and inspired a rural girl. For that, we thank you, Mokhadi." The Court of Arbitration for Sport has acknowledged that the regulations single out athletes like Semenya.
The panel found that the DSD regulations are discriminatory, but the majority of the panel found that on the basis of the evidence submitted by the parties in the procedure, such discrimination is a necessary, reasonable and proportionate means of achieving the IAAF's objective of preserving the integrity of female athletics.
Semenya has 30 days to appeal the decision. The new testosterone regulations come into effect on the 8th of May, which means if the 800-metre Olympic champion intends to run in September's World Championships, she'll have to start taking medication within the next 7 days.
Right, I'm joined by Vuyomaga, the Director General of the South African Sports Ministry, to give us more reaction from this landmark case. So the South African government says that this actually tramples on Caster Semenya's human rights. What are you going to do now?
Well, we have instructed Athletics South Africa to study the judgment. Post studying the judgment, they'll actually advise us. We are quite happy that there's a window to appeal the case, but we'll really be advised by Athletics South Africa what is the step going forward. But we'll continue to lobby the international community, as well as we have actually said to Athletics South Africa, they must actually lobby their counterparts across the world to make sure that we reverse this decision.
Okay, well, can you tell us how this verdict has impacted the people of South Africa? I mean, what's the reaction been?
Well, South Africans are quite devastated by it. You'll understand that Caster Semenya is our golden girl. She's the ambassador of the country. She's a role model to many rural young girls who actually see themselves through her, who believe because if Caster could make it coming from the rural areas, so they believe that they could make it. So it's really a devastating effect to majority of South Africans, and that's what has been occupying our country at the moment.
Well, needless to say, South Africa has supported her all the way, and you have put government money into her defence. Look, what went wrong?
Well, we don't know. That's what we're saying. We're going to really study the judgment and we'll understand exactly what really is the real reason why the judgment will have gone in that way. You'll understand out of the 3 judges, 2 have voted against us, 1 has voted with us. So we really want to really get an understanding. But we believe and we congratulate our team that they've done everything that they could possibly can, both the legal team, the medical team. We congratulate them. They were such patriots and they really were human rights activists for the better part of this judgment.
Okay, could the defense have done anything different?
Well, at the moment, I mean, we don't, as I'm saying, we don't have the appreciation currently of the judgment to see what exactly seems to be the nitty-gritties of that. Only when we really get an advice to really what will have happened. But we're quite proud of the work that they've put up. They've done everything that they could have possibly done. The medical team, the professors, and everyone that we have really, withdrawn across the world. We could not falter anyone. And as I'm saying, we're going to go back and study the judgment, and then we're going to provide a way forward.
Okay, and finally, what now for Caster? I mean, will she sit the next month of competitions out while she appeals?
Well, that's what we're saying. We as soon as the legal team is able to tell us what is possible and what is not possible and what must we do going forward, we'll be able to provide the world exactly what is our next move. Okay,
Marga, thank you very much for joining us on Beyond the Game. So what kind of an impact will this decision have on Caster Semenya's performance? Well, let's have a look at her fastest times from the 800 metres for each year. Now, aged just 18, Semenya won gold at the World Championships in Berlin. Authorities made her undergo a gender verification process and stopped her competing for 11 months. After that, she was forced to take hormone treatment and was cleared to race again, winning gold at the London Games. 2 years later, and while on hormone suppressants, the South African clocks her worst time since 2008, 7 seconds off her personal best. Another athlete challenges the IAAF rules and CAS suspends them for 2 years, meaning that Semenya can actually compete again naturally. She says she sets a personal best and a new South African record at the Rio Games. 2 years later, Semenya breaks her personal best once again with victory at the Diamond League meet in Paris. Well, I'm joined by Joanna Harper, a medical physicist and expert advisor to the IOC and IAAF, and Katrina Kakakis, a professor at Yale University who has researched testosterone extensively. Thank you both for coming on to Beyond the Game. Now, Joanna, I will start with you. What gives the IAAF the right to police a woman's body?
If one is to have meaningful competition in the women's category at the elite level, one must draw a line in some manner. And the primary difference between male athletes and female athletes, as shown by the CAS decision, is testosterone. And so given the level of science that we have today, drawing this line via testosterone is the best thing we can do right now.
Okay, well, Katrina, let me just come to you for a second. How much does Caster actually benefit from these high levels of testosterone?
It's not really a question whether any individual benefits. Every athlete, whether they have an intersex variation or whether they don't, make use of the testosterone in their own bodies to achieve their own best athletic performance. The burden that has been on the IAAF is to show that there's a relationship that is consistent and clear between testosterone levels and athletic performance. We haven't seen all of those data because the larger report hasn't been released. But having looked at the large body of scientific literature on the relationship between testosterone and athleticism, I can tell you that it is not clear and consistent. And even the IAAF's own data that they've produced show that in certain events, in certain categories, it's actually those individuals across groups with lower testosterone that perform better than those with higher testosterone. So we want a simple relationship, but scientifically, the evidence doesn't support that.
Okay, so the evidence doesn't support that. Joanna, what do you have to say about that?
Well, clearly CAS decided otherwise. CAS decided the evidence does support it, and that's why they ruled the way they did.
No, but they still have their concerns. I mean, nothing is set in stone here. There's still a lot of confusion. So how can they come to this decision?
How can who? CAS or the IAAF?
Well, both of them, because it's unfair to CAS. She was born naturally as a female.
She was declared female at birth. Caster Semenya probably has an intersex condition in which she has internal testes and probably produces male-like testosterone levels. And so that was the basis of the decision for these athletes with these conditions.
Okay, well, you have Michael Phelps. He had a usual low level of lactic acid, which was a major advantage in his sport. Why haven't authorities come down on him?
Well, there are all kinds of advantages in sport.
Exactly, there's all advantages in sport, so why have they come down on Caster Semenya?
Because it is necessary to draw a line between male athletes and female athletes. We don't draw a line based on long arms or height or any of these things, but we do draw a line between male athletes and female athletes. And I am firmly of the belief that we should use a biomarker that's an important differentiator between male athletic performance and female athletic performance.
Even if it goes against human rights?
Hand size, arm length, those.
Even if it goes against her human rights?
You know, Caster is still going to be able to compete and will do so successfully. So I don't feel, and neither does CAS clearly, that her human rights were violated.
Well, I think she does. Katrina, I'm going to bring you back in. You said that many mentions of testosterone as the male sex hormone related to Caster Semenya's case. It's inaccurate to call it the male sex hormone. Why is that?
I'll answer that in one quick second. I would like to reply that it's not true that CAS has said. In fact, it was a split decision. So there's clearly some question remaining among the arbitrators about how do you interpret the evidence that was presented. Moreover, in the press release, one of the points says that at least in one event, and perhaps others, what the IAAF provided was theoretical, not concrete evidence of a performance difference. So I don't think it's nearly as settled as what's just been said. But one of the major problems here is a conflation between different ideas. The argument being put forth by the IAAF is that testosterone, which overlaps between male and female athletes, provides a performance difference for those with higher levels. So is the idea, as has just been said, how do we separate males from females, which is ostensibly not the purported point of this, or is this a question about so-called unfair advantage? And we don't even have individuals right now who have researched this agreeing about how you understand this hormone in individual bodies regarding whether there's an overlap or not. So one of the problems of the century-long naming of testosterone as the male sex hormone is that, first of all, it's present in males and females. Second of all, is it's not at all simply responsible for things related to sex traits. In fact, it's important for all of the major organs of the body, and there are receptors throughout the body. So it's really an artifact of ideology and not scientific and research and evidence over the last 100 years that it continues to be misnamed and called as the male sex hormone. There's also a competing claim here that on the one hand, it is jet fuel for women athletes. On the other hand, it makes women sick, right? That too much testosterone is bad for women. So you can't have it both ways. So I think what we need is to understand and see what the evidence was that this decision was based on, so that outside scholars, researchers, and the public can make assessments of what was actually presented and looked at. And until we have that, it's very hard to understand how to come back against this particular decision with any kind of appeal.
Okay, Katrina, I will give you the last word. Look, athletes have a week to lower their levels if they want to compete now. Look, could suppressing one's natural testosterone actually harm the athlete?
You know, one of the things that I think is problematic is that people have skipped over the question, not only that these regulations discriminate against women and that the decision endorses that, but that it also endorses the sports governing bodies dictating unnecessary medical interventions for women athletes to compete in the category in which they belong and which they've always competed. And so these are not benign interventions. You are altering someone's lifelong physiology by requiring them to lower their testosterone. And that has significant effect for someone who's not even an elite athlete. And certainly the side effects based on how the testosterone is lowered can be very significant and harm performance. So we can't know when someone takes a drug to lower testosterone whether diminished performance is due to the altering of their physiology outside of the lowering of testosterone, by which I mean side effects and other things, or whether it's related to the testosterone. And I think that's a question that at this point no one can answer.
Okay, Joanna Harper and Katrina Karkasis, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond the Game. Now, the Court of Arbitration for Sport may have ruled that the regulations are valid, but it has some serious concerns. CAS is worried athletes won't be able to comply with the regulations and the consequences if they don't. The court is also concerned that there's a lack of actual evidence that athletes with higher testosterone levels have a significant advantage, as we just spoke about. Now, CAS has suggested delaying the application of the IAAF regulations until more evidence is available. And lastly, it's worried about the side effects on athletes from the hormone treatment. Right, sports lawyer Lydia Banjari is on hand to go through this complex ruling. Now, Lydia, as you just heard, there were concerns to the future of this regulation. Now, because of the complexity of the case, can you see this dragging out?
Absolutely. I mean, it's actually very difficult to see how this doesn't just roll on and on. As long as we accept, as both parties did and most people do, that we need to distinguish between male and female athletes and we will run separate competitions for the two genders, we will always have to decide for anybody which category they rightly belong in. Now, in the past, we've had a very simplistic view of this and saying, well, you're a man, you go in this camp, you're a woman, you go in that camp. But I think we recognise now that it's slightly more complicated and it's not binary. We also have a concept now of self-definition and if somebody as a man just says, well, actually I identify as a woman, does that allow them to compete in the female category? And if we're going to differentiate, then we have to have some kind of rule. We've had a long history of trying to work out how we differentiate. And thankfully, we've moved a long way from the visual assessment of a female body to see whether they were female. But we are still a long way from having an approach which can sit comfortably with the individual's human rights and also this bigger picture of how we separate male and female athletes. And as you've identified already in this programme, it's a split decision which just shows how nuanced and complicated this issue is.
Okay, well, looking at the case as a whole and from a legal standpoint as well, how did Semenya's team lose this case? And could they have done anything differently?
Well, it's always difficult to say because the decision will record some of the thinking. At the moment, we only have the media release. We don't actually have the summary, and the full reasons are confidential. But what they managed to establish, they didn't lose everything. They established that this policy is discriminatory, which must be right. If you say that female athletes, in order to compete, must comply with a certain regime which looks at their level of testosterone, and yet male athletes, we don't actually care how much testosterone they have. We allow them to compete against one another, and one might have a very high level of testosterone compared to the person standing in the racing line next to him, and we don't care and we don't regulate it, but we will for females. You create a discriminatory rule. So they did establish that the rules or the regulations are discriminatory. And where they lost is that actually they were unable to, or IAAF rather, were able to establish that they were a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. And when we look at that aim, The aim that they identified was preserving the integrity of female athletics in restricted events. It's much narrower than the old regulations which Duty Chan challenged. What they're saying is we've got evidence to suggest, and I wait to see what the evidence is as to whether or not we all agree with it, but actually in those restricted events there is some advantage. And what Caster's team were unable to do was to challenge that analysis to say, but actually what you're proposing is disproportionate or unnecessary or unreasonable.
Okay, Lydia Boundary, thank you very much for joining me on Beyond the Game. I'm just going to bring in Hudson Taylor, the Executive Director at Athlete Alley. Thank you very much for joining us on Beyond the Game. Now, Hudson, the UN said in March earlier this year that the IAAF regulations aren't compatible with international human rights norms, including the rights of women with differences of sex development. Now, if the UN are actually, I suppose, siding with Caster Semenya, surely she has a stronger case going forward.
One would hope. I mean, I think that access to sport is a human right. I think that the UN has said as such, and hopefully through the appeals of this decision, it will be overturned. But I think it's a sad day for sports. It's a sad day for I think women in sports. Because this CAS ruling essentially opens the door for the policing of female bodies in really problematic ways.
Okay, well, just following on from your answer, is the IAAF actually behind on cultural changes and social norms?
I think anytime the policies that govern sport don't reflect the full diversity of people who are trying to access sport, there is catch-up or need to change policy. And certainly Caster, Duty Chan, a number of other athletes who have been impacted by these regulations are now sort of being isolated and excluded from participating in the sport they love. And so long as sport policy doesn't reflect and affirm the identity of those athletes who are trying to access sport, there's work to be done to modify and improve those policies.
Okay, Hudson Taylor, thank you very much for your views and for joining us on Beyond the Game. Now, over the past decade, Caster Semenya has endeared herself to athletics fans around the world. She's broken records, broken them again, and provided us with memories on and off the track. Robin Adams has more on the world champion who hails from one of the most rural parts of South Africa.
Mogadi Caster Semenya was born on January 7th, 1991. Her love affair with running goes back to her childhood days in a rural town of the Limpopo province in South Africa's north. It's the talent she honed on those dusty roads which has taken her around the world while keeping her rooted in her hometown.
So what I want to do, I want to be part of the family, walking the journey with them, going down there deep in the rural areas, changing the lives, of kids, showing them that there are opportunities out there, if they can work hard. I always believe in that word, working hard, you can never fail in anything.
But from humble beginnings, Semenya has blossomed into one of the most recognizable faces in world sport. And her commercial value keeps increasing, with sponsors Nike leading the charge.
Would it be easier for you if I wasn't so fast? Will it be simpler if I stopped winning? Or stopped at my first steps? That's too bad, because I was born to do this.
Her social media following has also grown. On Monday, after clinching her 18th national title at the South African Championships, she tweeted to her 190,000 followers, "What I do on track, it's like Brooke in The Bold and the Beautiful. I change events just like that." In reference to the character played by actress Catherine Kelly Lang in the popular soapie The Bold and the Beautiful.
Oh, the drama. It's incredible.
Interestingly, Semenya doesn't follow a strict diet, certainly not by professional athlete standards. Her love for meat and millie meal a South African staple, is well known. Any South African will tell you Caster Semenya is the country's golden girl. And people joke that there are mini tremors at the airports when supporters gather to welcome her home. A few weeks ago, Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world for 2019. An accolade, despite Wednesday's legal setback, many South Africans would say is well deserved.
And that's it for our special program on the Caster Semenya verdict. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.
Beyond the Game, brought to you by Turkish Airlines.